Hey Kyle, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
I'm recording our meeting so that we
That's fine.
can you can have it as a resource.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's going to be I'm really excited about some of the stuff that over as I've been going through it and coming, you know, thinking about it, it starts to connect up with the stars. But it's very complicated. It's not easy. It's not straightforward.
Yeah. I've had but it's funny because like I said, I told you before when I first started going through it, and I was just going through it to record the cataclysm,
Hmm.
with Randall's and all that. Like I knew it was there, the flood and everything, and we had the dragon, of course, which I said the Mohawk word for dragon, Harnessine, translates to meteor,
Mm.
or that's its literal translation. But when I first started, I was stunned at one detail. Why is she combing his hair?
Hmm.
And then Deer Hunter and White Corn Maiden, then that was floodgate. I just opened up after that, and then and I could just see everything from there. So
Yeah.
that was just amazing. So
That's great. That's great. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing those accounts with me, both the Mohawk and the Onondaga
yeah,
that you sent.
there's actually there's one more I'm gonna send you, and that's our oldest one that we have. It's from 1710. We
Wow.
think where it originates from. So there's definitely like you can see if you go through the Onondaga one, at one point it just goes off the rails and it's obviously Christianized.
Mm.
Where he sends them to hell because he doesn't ask to be to repent, and
Mm.
so that's kind of the trick that you have to play with in some of these creation stories. At how Christianized was it? How pure is it? So the most pure form we have is it's called the Gibson version,
Mm.
and the lady that gave me the book that I told you about, where our thinking address that says that the last thing we need to get back is our stars,
Yeah.
or our connection stars and our stories. Um, she speaks not only Mohawk fluently, she also speaks Onondaga fluently. So she translated that version from Onondaga into Mohawk, and then from Mohawk into English.
Mm.
Uh, so that was so that's probably the purest form of the story that we can get there, that we can ensure that there's no Christianity influence in it whatsoever, because it was before in the Iroquois, the Senecas had this guy named Handsome Lake, and he kind of influenced. He basically on all our traditions and everything else like that. So it had that influence after a certain time. So this was before Handsome Lake, and it's a fairly pure form. And part of that though, I'm going to be using in my presentation on Sunday. We had some of it tonight. I missed some of it when the Mayan was on tonight, because me being a Marine, I was looking for my crayons that I lost, and got distracted and couldn't realize that the thing had already started. But I did catch the Aztec, Aztec gentleman. He was on and talking. It's really incredible to see that they have built into everything. They knew they have the entire history of the Earth
Mm.
built into when a molten mass and this other. They had the different ages when gases mixed and life began. It's all tied back in. So that was interesting. But and that's how I said I got pulled into this, not really being a knowledge keeper or whatsoever. And now because I know I can tie our stories to the stars, now all of a sudden, okay, you're a knowledge keeper, you're in. So, and that's
That's
of
really
course thanks to
neat.
you. So
That's really special.
yeah,
Well, you know, um, what I was going to say is that uh, we should, I think it's good to record it and I can make it as an unlisted YouTube so that people can't just stumble across it, but you would have the link and you could share it with others that you want to share it with. But that
Yeah,
way,
yeah, that'd be
you
great.
want to keep it private, you can also keep it private. So, because I know there's, there's a balance between what you want to show to the world or not show to the world. I know that sometimes Native nations have wanted to keep their traditions, from being
There,
hidden or
yeah.
something. Yeah. But this way, if I make it as a unlisted, nobody will find it, but you'll have the link. So you can share it with whomever you want. And
Yeah.
I think it's really special that you have these knowledge keepers who are trying to preserve and also trying to reconnect, because as I was thinking about it, really that's the whole state of the whole planet, is that they've lost connection with the stars and the ancient things that were given to them, but they don't even know it. You're trying to
Yeah.
hold on to it, but most people don't even realize, the Christianity was not anybody's original instructions, right? There was the Greek myths, there was the Norse myths, there was, all these different sacred traditions of all the different cultures, and then those got destroyed, basically. So, what my ancestors knew has been replaced, and nobody even knows it, right? They're like,
Yeah.
oh, well, yeah, our traditions are Christianity. Well, no, they weren't, not originally. They were connected to the stars, and so is all the stories in the Bible connected to the stars.
Yeah, which sometimes now when like I said, when after of course reading your books and um kind of looking now at our ancient legends and to say, was it Christianized or was it just we happen to have the same story like everybody else?
That's what I was gonna say.
It's kind of hard to balance. Yeah,
I was gonna say that because
because that.
there are things that are in there that are shared in other cultures or that are in the Bible, but they probably wouldn't have been taught that way, or it's like the people who just took the Bible literally wouldn't know they're a slightly different version or of some of the stories. It's like there's a connection, but it's not necessarily that it was brought by Christianizers or something. It's like there are connections, but they might be, like you said, very ancient. They're all using the same patterns.
Actually, on the president, the Aztec showed that one of their signs for their god, their main god, was a cross.
Right.
And so when the Spanish showed up, they're like, "That's your god," and the cross, So
I've read that.
but the meaning behind it was very different from the Christian one. But so it's pretty striking. Looking at all ancient ones, they're all basically the same. So that's why I look at it when I think I sent the Mohawk one where he exchanged the ribs. I guess that's the difference between the biblical one where he takes a rib from Adam and makes the woman. This he just exchanges the ribs between them. And okay, is that or is that really just our myth? They switched them. It's something similar to the same legacy, global legacy behind it. So
yes, see, that I think is very interesting, because just like you said, if it had been Christianized, it would have been no, the woman was formed by the man's rib, and that's why the man is, in control of the woman, and that's the way it's been taught in Christian theology for hundreds of years. But in the versions in both of the stories, they have the rib is exchanged, and that's very different. You don't see that at all in the Bible, that it's reciprocal, that it's equal, and that it causes them to embrace one another.
Yeah, and that's the thing with the especially like I said with the Iroquois, and I think probably for I can't say that, but definitely for the Iroquois, the woman is the one in power. She controls everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
she's revered. She's responsible for giving life and educating
Mm-hmm.
the next generation, and that's why in our traditions, when a man got married, he moved in with the wife's family.
Mm-hmm.
He was now part of her family. It wasn't, the Western thinking now where it's the
Yes.
opposite. So, and everything is by the matriarch. So, like your clan goes by what your clan your mother is. So my mother's a bear clan. My father's a turtle.
Mm.
I'm a bear clan because that's what the clan of my mother. So,
That's very, very interesting. I had heard that the Iroquois were matriarchal in the past, but I didn't know that about the clans and the and those aspects of it.
yeah,
Um,
and like even today, like the it's the clan mothers who choose the chief.
hmm.
They're because they're we see them as they don't get as emotional as men when it comes
Hmm.
to power.
Hmm.
They can take more and they can see like, okay, who's the smart ones, who are
Hmm.
the dumbasses that we don't want to make sure they get in charge, and they
Yeah.
can select. And from young age, these guys are going to be their chiefs further down the road. And if in some way they start becoming more too powerful, they have the power to remove them as a chief. The only
Hmm.
people that have power to remove a chief are the women.
Hmm. I didn't
So
know any of those details. I had just heard, that it was in the past matriarchal, but I didn't know any of those specifics at all.
yeah, yeah, it's very and it's pretty much like, even though I grew up in an era where we weren't really following our traditions, it was always kind of pushed onto us and everything else like that we learned that and
Hmm.
taught that way, and respect for the women and everything else. So
Hmm. Well, I'll try and touch on that in my slideshow a little bit of the exchange of the ribs, but I
mhm.
prepared some slides to to show what I was able to suggest. I'm not an
Mhm.
authority. I mean, I'm an authority in that I've been studying this for 12 years, and I think I have taken it farther than it's been taken in the past. But I'm not, I'm not infallible on my interpretations. And over
well
time, sometimes I change, what I said
well that's
12
what,
years
that's
ago.
what yeah, well that's what I'm saying. Like my interpretation is like kind of like on the book, your second edition, your
Mm.
first edition, you looked at it this way. Now you got more information, you learn more,
Yes.
and there could be a second edition.
Yes.
So you're you're the expert in terms of you've been studying it for 12 years. I've been studying it for 2 months. So
Right, right, right. But what I want to do is give tools to you and to whomever else you want to share it with, that then you can look at the stars and the myths and say, well, I know Dave suggested this. I disagree with him here. I agree with him here. Um, so I'll show you. But I think is these are very complicated. Um, it's tricky. Like I said in my email, I usually don't make really confident arguments unless I see two or three kind of clues that all match up. But
mhm.
especially with oral traditions, you don't always have as many. Like with a text, you can look at, like in the lines of the Bible, and say, okay, I think that Eve is this constellation. Aha, here's a here's a specific thing that specifically says that her seed will crush the head of the serpent. Okay, that's very clear. Now I'm very confident that this is this is this. Um,
Mhm.
but there are some places in these texts that you shared with me that there are parallels to things that I've seen many times in other cultures, and where I can say, this is so clear of a parallel that I think this is a strong suggestion. So I'll show you a few of those. Whenever you're ready, I'll
Yeah,
start sharing my screen.
yeah, yeah.
But
Ready now. Yeah.
great. Okay. Let me get this on the right slide, and then I'm going to share my screen. And thanks for doing it so late. I know it's late back there. It's probably 10 o'clock in, are you in Ganawagi?
Yeah, Ganawaga.
Ganawagi,
That's
yeah.
why I got my glass of wine. You can still drink your tea or whatever, but
Yeah, I'm
hey,
drinking,
it's 10 p.m. over here.
yeah. I'm just drinking hot water to make sure my voice is smooth. Let me share my screen and then let's see. Well, this is my title slide. And so I wanted to learn how to say Onondaga. Is that right?
Yeah, Onondaga. They're the keepers of the fire, because they're on the Haudenosaunee flag, or well, what people call us the Iroquois, we call ourselves Haudenosaunee. There's 4 trees and the square in the middle. That square is the Onondaga. They're the keepers of the fire, and that's where all the council meetings are held. There. So.
4 trees and a square in the middle. That's very interesting.
Wait, no, that's the opposite. I've mixed it up. It's a tree in the middle and 4 squares.
4 squares. Okay.
the great tree, because we have the great tree of peace, and that's where the fires are held, and the council meeting is held there.
That's awesome.
Or
and
because I think you're already thinking so.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm already thinking. I was trying to make connections, and then Mohawk is. I'm saying that right?
Yeah, Mohawk. We actually call her. That's what the Hurons called us. We're Mohawks. We called ourselves Ganigahaga, or people of the Flint, because the area we're in, there's a lot of Flint. So that's what we call ourselves.
And there's obviously Flint in the creation stories, too.
Yes, in the Mohawk one.
Yeah.
We're a bit biased in that one. So.
Right. Well, I thought it would be appropriate at the very start to just pause, because when we go into, sacred traditions, to remember that these are the words of ancestors that were passed down, to just silently, for people who are watching, just however you want to kind of prepare your mind or think back on all those generations that pass them down to us now, to have a encounter with our lives and to inform our lives. And so I'm very grateful that you shared these stories with me to have an opportunity to learn from them too. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. And hopefully everything I say, I always want to say things that are right and not wrong. And but if I say something that's wrong, then we can leave that aside and just go with the good things that are good. So hopefully this will all be positive, and we're exploring the connection to the stars. And at first I was going to start right in with the stars, but I was thinking about maybe just putting a little framework up front, because when we were talking, when you and I had a chance to meet in person at the canyons and the cataracts there in Washington State, you were talking about how it goes, maybe you were thinking the creation story goes through the whole zodiac. And I've been thinking about it, and I thought it would be good to give this framework of what I think I have seen these patterns emerging in these myths around the world. It's not always going around the whole zodiac. It's like there are symbols that carry different meanings, and it's like in the alphabet. This is an example I've used with other people. If I were to say, hey, in this platoon of Marines, or this platoon of soldiers, we're not going to call each other by our names anymore. We'll just use the letters of the alphabet. And Kyle, you can be A, and Mr. Jones over there, you can be B, and Smith, you can be C, D, E, F, G, and eventually you get to someone and he's Z. Well, we have kind of like some cultural like baggage with the letters. Like Kyle might be like, hey, I'm A. That's great. I'm A. And the guy who's B might be like, why do I have to be B? I don't want to be B. And the guy who's Z is like, man, Kyle's making fun of me because I'm Z. And, everyone's making jokes about Z. Well, what I'm saying is that the letters in our culture have taken on different kind of positions. And the same thing happens with the zodiac and the constellations of the zodiac that the sun and the planets move through. They're not all, they don't all have the same meaning. It's not like A, B, C, they're all equal. It's like the constellations of the zodiac in this ancient system have connotations and have significance attached to them. And it has to do with the cycles of the year, especially the cycles of the year, also the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the different planets, and the cycles of precession. But so I'm not going to go into great depth about it, but I just want to lay out what I think is going on, because as I go through these stories, I don't see it as going through the whole zodiac, and I wouldn't really expect it to go through the whole zodiac. I know that, maybe that was some of the interpretation that you were looking towards, but it actually seems to cluster around specific constellations, and it's the constellations that all the myths tend to cluster around because it's a very significant part of the zodiac that has different spiritual meanings. So I'm just going to explain this diagram. This is a zodiac wheel that was drawn in the early 1600s, but it's just a shorthand way of trying to show the cycle of going through the whole year as the sun goes through the different constellations. So these are one way of depicting them. Oops. Let me get there. Okay, so I just brought in all the names of the zodiac constellations. This is the way they're depicted in the 1600s. We don't necessarily even draw, Cancer the crab up there looks like a lobster, but
yeah,
this is this is the way the sun goes through the year. And in this particular diagram, they've been arranged so that the sun goes through clockwise in the direction of those little orange arrows that I have. It's going around clockwise, but you could just as easily draw the diagram counterclockwise. Obviously, the sun isn't actually going around this piece of paper. This is just like a map to show what really happens out in the sky. But in this case, it's going that direction. So,
yeah,
and you can jump in at any time. Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, I just want to add something. Might be of interest, might not be. In our culture, counterclockwise is life, clockwise is death.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Or good luck is counterclockwise. Clockwise is bad luck, basically. So all our ceremonies, like even when we play games, most games, like even board games, it always goes clockwise. Ours, we always play it counterclockwise. Even if the game says do it clockwise, even though like my household game night, we always go counterclockwise.
Counterclockwise. That's interesting. Well, and I didn't know that before, but if you were to stand outside and face to the north and stand there and look at the North Star, then east would be to your right and west would be to your left because you're facing north. And if you watch the stars going around the north celestial pole, which is marked by the Polaris, the North Star, you would see them going from, everything is rising from the right on the east and setting in the west. So you would be actually seeing them going around the north celestial pole counterclockwise if you were facing north. So that's very interesting. But like I said, you could arrange this however you want. This particular diagram was arranged going clockwise. And I happen to like this diagram because it, we kind of think of things going around a clockwise. So it kind of helps. I can refer to 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And so in this diagram, the way it's laid out, I've drawn a line across it because the upper half of the year, the upper half above this line is the half of the year where daylight is longer than darkness. So in the northern hemisphere, that's the summer months. So we've got the days are longer on the top half here, the way it's laid out. Like I said, you could arrange this however you wanted. But when the sun is passing through these signs in the northern hemisphere, that's when the days are longer. And on the bottom, that's when the days are shorter. And there's a crossing point where we, during the year, go from days being longer to days being shorter. And then 6 months later, we have another crossing point where we go from days being shorter to days being longer. And you can see I've put 2 X's at those 2 crossing points. And those, of course, are the equinoxes. But during one part of the year, the days are longer. And of course, at the very top, then we're going to have the longest day, the very longest day. And at the very bottom, the very shortest day. And those are the solstices. So I'm just laying out this diagram to try and give a framework that I have seen in myths of other cultures going on, where they use these different constellations to indicate things that have additional meaning besides just days longer and days shorter. It has to do with life and death and coming down into the world, and from the other realm and coming into this realm. And so the longer days in this diagram are on the top, the shorter days are on the bottom. Then we have a very shortest day and a very longest day. So we could also divide the year with another line there, and then you get the cross right there. So there's a line that divides the upper half where days are longer, and there's another line that divides right and left, at least as this is laid out. On the right side, days are getting shorter, right? Because we get the longest at top up there at 12 o'clock. But as we're on the right side going around, days are getting shorter. In the upper half, they're still longer than nights, the daylight, but they are getting shorter. So on the right half, we're getting shorter. But then when we get to the shortest day, things turn around and days start to get longer. So on the whole left half, days are getting longer. From that shortest day, days are getting longer, but on the lower half, they're still shorter. Even while they're getting longer, night is still longer than day, right? So
yeah,
now we got this framework. And what's really interesting is that you would think that the ancient myths, you might think, well, which half would be the land of life and, you know, humans on this planet, and which half might be, you know, death and the grave and what happens after death. You might think, well, of course, the upper half, that's life, and the lower half, days are shorter and things are dark, that's death. But actually, what I've found, and I base this off, I first heard this from insightful student of the myths named Alvin Boyd Kuhn, who lived from 1880 to 1963. He said, you know, you would think that, but actually we find in the ancient myths that the lower half, the shorter half, is this life, because we come down from the spirit realm, the realm of, you know, fire and air, into this lower realm where we're made out of clay, the lower elements of earth and water. And we don't see things as clearly down here in the lower realm. We're down in a body experiencing this, actually the lower journey. So he argued, and from my studies of the myths, I have found evidence that agrees that I think he's right, that actually on this wheel, the birth happens at the point where things plunge down into the lower half. So at that crossing point over, oh, and I'll put in, you know, the names of the longest day is the solstice. There's a summer that happens in June here. Anyway, but the plunge down happens over at the September equinox. That's when the days are getting shorter and shorter, and they finally cross over into the lower half right here at that September equinox. That's where we plunge down into this lower realm. That's, in the myths, the first birth. And we often have twins in myths around the world where there's one twin and another twin. If I put up first birth, then that means there's probably a second birth. And in the myths, not just in Christianity where they talk about, oh, you have to be born again, or are you a born again Christian? But in the myths, there are second births, or there are second mothers in some of the myths. Like Osiris in ancient Egypt kind of has two mothers. And Dionysus also in ancient Greece has two mothers. And Jesus always has two Marys around him. There's Mary, his mother, but then there's also Mary Magdalene. Anyway, the first birth happens here at the September equinox as we're plunging down into this life. And then this whole arrow down here, this is our life moving through this lower realm, this realm of kind of, you know, we make mistakes. We have times when we feel more spiritual and times when we feel less spiritual, times when we're tangled up more in the body, times when maybe we're feeling more in control of our passions and things. But anyway, we're down here struggling through this lower realm. And you would think that, well, the myths then mean, if you just keep going, you'll get to, you'll get to enlightenment. But no, actually what happens is in these myths, you see it, like, especially in poems like the Odyssey, which I really love, the Odyssey of ancient Greece. You see Odysseus, he thinks he's getting through the journey, but he keeps getting boom, sent back, boom. He thinks he's almost home, and then a disaster happens, and his passions run away with him, and he gets sent back down. And it's like he's in the spin cycle in a washing machine over and over. And it turns out that the myths, there's a pattern where there's a second birth, and that second birth actually happens down at this shortest point. That's where things are darkest and lowest on the cycle. So if it's lowest there, then everything from there is up. But the path up in the myths is not what you would think, continuing around to the left on the zodiac. The path up actually goes, so there's the second birth. I forgot to click the thing. Second birth down there. The path up actually goes a different way, not up through the zodiac signs, but up through, towards, straight up through the Milky Way. The Milky Way runs the opposite way. So there's a lot of importance attached to figures that are along the Milky Way. There's importance attached to the zodiac, but there's also this other path, that's the Milky Way path, and it runs, the sun and the planets go through the zodiac, but the Milky Way goes up overhead, almost crosswise. So it's like we're inside of two rings. One ring is what the sun and the planets are on, and then there's another ring that's the Milky Way that's going around the other way. So I just wanted to kind of put this framework out there, because you're going to see in my exploration and discussion of some of the stories that I find in those accounts that you shared with me, a lot of figures that are along the Milky Way. The zodiac, of course,
well,
is
just by the way, we call the Milky Way is known as the pathway of spirits on our people, and it's basically, I found I was able to, like I said, I was able to, one of our stories is about about the four winds, and we have the bear to the north, the panther to the west, the moose with the long horns to the east, and the docile fawn to the south. So obviously, there's a Big Dipper. I mean, the Small Dipper, Leo, the panther, Taurus, the moose, and Monoceros, the unicorn, or the docile fawn to the south. And in another legend, it's basically when you die, and to guide your spirit through the spirit of pathways is the hunter, obviously Orion, and the south wind is his helper, who's right beside him. Monoseph is right beside him there. So like everything just like clicked right in, which is very also, again, similar to the ancient Egyptians. So
and I also think that pathway is not just, so I think that these myths are not also, they are talking about, we descend into this life, and then we go along the pathway of spirits, and all those cycles of birth and death. But I also think it's talking about things we have to do in this life, not just this going up and connecting with higher self. That's why I believe these twins in the myths are so important, because it's not actually two different people. It's we become separated or alienated even from our own self, and we have to recover self, alienation. And I think the myths are there to help heal trauma, or to show us the way to reconnect with who we are, even in this life, along that path as well. So I think these ancient wisdom myths that have been given, and sacred traditions that have been given to each culture around the world, were originally for this beneficial purpose of, on many layers. I think I'm convinced that they're talking on just profound, many, many layers. So it's not just about the cycle of birth and death and the spirit realm, but also cycles within our own life, where we go through recovery of who we are. And so I think they're here to help us with all these things. But I just wanted to lay that framework out. Let's jump into some of the stories that you shared with me, and I'll show you what I think some of the things could be. Like I said, I always want to be very, I'll be more confident when I see more evidence. And then when there's less evidence to go on, then I only just, I say, I'm not super confident about this, or this is just a suggestion. But some things I think we can be pretty confident about. But let me show you. So here, can you see the stars pretty well on the sky there? I'm going to, because you're free to share this with whomever you want. We'll keep it, a private link, but you can share it with whomever you want. And I know you've seen some of these, but I'm going to outline some of them. And you also said you were having trouble with stellarium. So here's a stellarium screenshot. You can see I'm looking towards the south. You can see I've chosen a specific part of the sky where the Milky Way is very bright.
Yeah.
In fact, I bumped up in stellarium. You can bump up the Milky Way a little bit to really show it, which I did. But this is the brightest part of the Milky Way. This is the brightest part of the Milky Way. And this is a very important part of the sky. This is the part of the zodiac sky that is right at that turning point, that lowest point. And that's where the path, that shining path leading upward, the Milky Way, is going past these figures like Ophiuchus and Hercules that we'll talk about. So let me start with outlining some constellations. I know they're outlined already, but I'm going to emphasize some of them. And oh yeah, today's 18 June. So these are my interpretations as of 18 June. Maybe in 2024 or 2025 or 2026,
completely different.
I may have some, I may have more wisdom than I have today. But these are my best tries for now, Kyle. And like I said, I appreciate your asking me, and I want to say things that are true and not things that are not true. So I'm very careful about that. And let's start with the familiar Big Dipper. So even though we're looking to the south, stellarium is trying to make us feel like we're in, a great dome that's curving around on either side. You see how the ground kind of curves. It doesn't really curve up like that when we're standing on the ground, but that if you were to turn to the left, east would be, flat, but it's showing things moving from east to west. So there's the Big Dipper, and you have to imagine, those front two pointers are pointing to the North Star. It's kind of behind our head as we're standing here. The North Star, it doesn't fit on the screen.
Yeah, behind us almost.
It'd be up behind the tops of our heads, the very kind of crown of our heads. So that's the way we're facing. So there's the Big Dipper, and of course the Big Dipper is within the Great Bear. You mentioned the Little Bear a minute ago when you were talking about the cardinal directions, but the Big Dipper, we do have a bear in the story. I don't really get into the bear too much, but probably that's a good candidate for the bear. That's the Great Bear. Like the nose, the way H.A. Ray outlines the Great Bear, the nose is right at the tip of the handle of the Big Dipper. So
and on my stellarium too, I just use the H.A. Ray because I know you use that, and that's what I'm familiar with now. So it's like I just go with that. So
and I found that the H.A. Ray outlines are very close to a very close match to ancient artwork from ancient Greece. I'll even show some of that ancient Egypt. So I do think there's evidence that these are the way that ancient system is looking at these constellations. However, H.A. Ray figured it out, we don't know.
Yeah, because when I first downloaded Stellarium, started using it, and I took off the thing, I was just looking, it was like whatever the default was completely horrible.
Yeah,
it was just like a line, and that's it. And like then I realized the feature, and I turned on H.A. Ray is now my default one that I use now. So.
Right. Yeah. So these are the H.A. Ray outlines that I'm showing here. So let's continue with a few more outlines of important ones. Oh yeah, so Great Bear. So I also made a little label. I'm sure everybody sees that that's the Milky Way, but this is the most important, mythologically important part of the Milky Way. The whole Milky Way is important to the myths. You mentioned Orion. He's on the other side of the Milky Way, but this is a very important part of the Milky Way. It's the widest part, and it's the brightest part, and it also has this feature of, can you see this pathway across the Milky Way? That's called the dark rift. the dark rift, or that really bright part below the dark rift is sometimes called the galactic core or the galactic center.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists today, astronomers, think that that's kind of the center of our galaxy, where the stars may be born, kind of like a fried egg.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the yolk of the fried egg, and we're sitting
Yeah.
inside of the fried egg. But there's this dark rift, and scientists don't really know what causes it. There's some different theories. It doesn't matter for the myths. That dark rift is important in the myths. It's like a pathway across a river, or in this story, we have a log across the river. And then a different time, you have someone trying to make an ice bridge across the river. Remember in the story?
Yeah.
So there's a couple
Mm-hmm.
paths across the river. Well, in the Bible, we have someone crossing a body of water, and that is Moses when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. And I have shown that this crossing the Red Sea goes right across this path. And the figure that is Moses is holding his staff out into that path across the Red Sea. See, the Bible, for those that you share this with who haven't heard me talk before, the Bible is based on this same system. This is the same system underneath all the sacred stories around the world. But somewhere along the line, people started to say, oh no, the Bible is true and everything else is not true. And by true, they mean the Bible stories actually happened and all the other ones are just myths. Well, that's wrong. The Bible stories are based on the stars. All the different sacred traditions around the world are based on the stars. And the Moses story, where he holds the staff out into the dark rift and then they cross the Red Sea on dry ground, is talking about this very part. So I'll take the lines out and you can see that Red Sea. Can you see a figure kind of holding a staff towards that dark rift to make the pathway open up?
Zophicus?
Yes.
Yeah.
So usually I say Ophiuchus, but some people actually, and you can look it up in a dictionary, and some people say Ophiuchus, and the dictionary says both are right. I say Ophiuchus, but it means a serpent holder in Greek. Yeah, Ophiuchus. And I'm going to outline that right now. So here's Ophiuchus. It has this central body, and you can look at that central body. It almost looks like a doorway. Could also be a house kind of a shape with a roof on top. That's the central body of Ophiuchus. And then Ophiuchus is holding these two serpent halves on either side. Those serpent halves, it looks like a serpent. On the left, there's a tail as we're looking at it. On the right, there's a head.
Yeah.
And the serpent goes across. But in the myths, Ophiuchus, or some people say Ophiuchus, but the word comes from ophite, or oph means snake in Greek. That snake can turn into different things in different myths. It can be a vine that has grapes on one end, or it can be a mirror. You see that the serpent's head could be seen as a mirror, or it could be a flower.
Mm-hmm.
That serpent's head could be a flower. It could be all kinds of different things. The sacred myths around the world are very creative, and they use these figures in many different ways. And then he has two little feet down there. So that's Ophiuchus, a central body. Sometimes Ophiuchus will have a big shield, and you can see why, the legs are kind of short. So it must be that big central square is a shield kind of covering up part of the body. So a lot of times Ophiuchus will have a spear. You can see why, because it's kind of got like a stick off to the left, but you see how he's holding a rod out towards the dark rift, and that's Ophiuchus. Moses is an Ophiuchus figure. And Ophiuchus figures often have a rod or a spear or a staff. And when Moses holds the staff out, sometimes his staff turns into a snake, remember? But and that's why, there's why it turns into a snake, because Ophiuchus holding a snake, but also he holds the staff out and makes the dark, the path across the Milky Way. So that's going to be important, in our stories. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just on the side, we have one myth that I tied to that. Where the Thunderer, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's something that there's this colorful snake that he captured, and he put it in the cage, and it always kept trying to escape, and he'd always go again, and he'd grab it, and he'd put it back into the cage. I'm thinking Hydra, as it looks like its head is away, it's trying to escape, and the Thunderer is usually Aquarius, because he's there to replenish the earth with water, but at times he's also the bolt thrower, the thunderbolt. And he's the Hercules.
Yeah.
And his main enemy that he's always trying to keep underground is the two-headed serpent, the horned serpent, which is obviously Scorpio.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. That's great. So, yeah, I will say that thunder figures and also rain figures are very often associated with Hercules, and we'll see Hercules in a second. So Hercules is right above Ophiuchus, and Hercules figures in myths around the world have battles with serpents. Like Hercules fights the Hydra, the nine-headed serpent, the hero Hercules, or his name in Greek was Heracles. And the Romans called him Hercules, but he fights a nine-headed Hydra. But also Zeus fights Typhon, which is like a dragon creature. And Thor fights the Midgard serpent in Norse myths. The myths of my ancestors on my dad's side come from Norway, and the Norse myths have Thor, who's a Hercules figure, and he fights a serpent too, the Midgard serpent, or Jormungandr, sometimes called. But anyway, Hercules is a very important constellation that I'm glad you brought it up. It's perfect timing. It's right above Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus could be the cage, by the way, that he's putting down on top of the serpent. Right? The horned serpent.
Oh, yeah.
See how it looks like it could be a basket. Sometimes Ophiuchus is like a basket, upside down basket.
Yeah.
You can see that. So let me outline Hercules. This is the H.A. Ray outline. Now, it looks like a powerful figure holding a weapon. Now, there is another way to see Hercules that we'll get to a little bit later as a tree, which you would think, what, as a tree? But I'll show it to you a little bit later when we get to it. It's very important that you know, however, that Hercules sometimes is a tree. So, and that's around the world. The Buddha meditates under a tree. In the myths of ancient India, the Buddha figure meditates under a fig tree. Well, the Buddha is associated with Ophiuchus, and the fig tree in this case is associated with Hercules. I'll show you how Hercules looks like a tree a little bit later. It's hard to see. It's like two totally different ways of looking at it, but we'll see it in a little bit. Over here we have the woman figure of Virgo. Remember I said that's kind of the plunge down into this life. Virgo, as she's outlined, she looks like she's giving birth. She's lying on her back. She's got her legs elevated and apart. So even though she's called Virgo, the virgin, she is often giving birth. And virgin means, she's a maiden. And a lot of times in the stories, you have someone giving birth, and it's like, wait a minute, who's the father? I thought she was a maiden or a virgin. So Virgo is, remember on that outline of the wheel, of the zodiac wheel, that's the point of our plunge down into the lower, in the myths. The point of the first birth is right at Virgo, right at that. That's the fall equinox happens right around when the sun is going through Virgo. So there's Virgo. I'm just kind of introducing all these figures, and then we'll get into the stories. But you can see how she's giving birth, and you could think of her giving birth to Ophiuchus. You see how Ophiuchus, I mean, he's pretty big. Be like, wow, that'd be a big baby for her to give birth to. But very often in the myths, Ophiuchus is like when Adam and Eve are told, well, the offspring of the woman, or the seed of the woman, will crush the head of the serpent. That's the offspring of Eve, is Ophiuchus, and the head of the serpent that's down below is Scorpio. I haven't outlined Scorpio. I kind of saved Scorpio until a little bit later, but Scorpio you can see right down below Ophiuchus, and you said the horns.
Yeah, he's right below him.
There's the two horns.
Yeah.
So she could also be giving birth to the serpent in some, to Scorpio. In some myths, like Maui in the Pacific is sometimes born with 8 heads, and his mother throws him into the sea foam because he has 8 heads. Well, that's Scorpio again. Remember, Hercules fights the Hydra with 9 heads. That's actually Scorpio has multiple heads, but we'll get to that a little later. But you can see how she's could be envisioned as giving birth, right? Now above her in the sky, there's this figure of a herdsman. Yeah, the herdsman, or that's what he's called in Western cultures. The Boötes. It means a herdsman. But
how's it pronounced?
So I think it's pronounced Boötes. You see those 2 dots that I put above the second O. Those 2 dots are like to say you pronounce the O twice. Otherwise, we would just think, it must be boots, right? or booties or something.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been calling it this whole time. So
Yeah,
I
but
just call them the Motley two dots that go over the
yeah,
top of them. So
the two dots tell you to emphasize to say the next O again. And actually, bow, that word bow or boo is a word for a cow. Like bucolic is like a pastoral scene, or Alexander the Great had a horse named Bucephalus, which means cow head. He called his horse cow head. Boo means cow, and cephalus means head. So Boötes is like a herdsman who watches the cows or something, and he's kind of sitting there peacefully.
okay,
Looks like there's a pipe coming out of his mouth, but he's above
yeah,
Virgo. And I noticed in one of your stories, and actually both of the creation accounts, there's an event, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but where a child comes out of the mother's armpit instead. Well, look, there's Boötes kind of right above her armpit. So you could have two babies being born. One could be Ophiuchus and one could be Boötes, or at least in that particular part of the story. Now, sometimes, you know, a character will move through, I call it moving through different constellations. Like just because, let's say, one of the twins might have been born as Boötes doesn't mean that he can't also be Hercules or something like that, you know, later on as he grows up. They don't, there's only so many constellations. So they, you know, put on different costumes, or they'll play different, it's like an actor will play different parts. And it's like, wait a minute, that's the same
yeah,
actor. You know, you're playing a different character, but I know that's the same guy who just came out on stage 10 minutes ago, but he has different mask on or something. So that the
yeah. Well,
constellations do that.
with that, like, yeah, like the way I was looking at it, going through the stories, and well, it was Sagittarius, you know, was the original mother, the
Yeah.
lodge,
Yeah.
and Manix is combing his hair. But then when he dies, where they put him at, on top of the great tree on the Onondaga in the Mohawk story, at the top of the lodge. So Booties now becomes Hercules. Once he
Right.
dies, he's
Yeah.
Hercules, and that frees him up to become her wife, and they sleep feet to feet, or soul
Right.
to soul, as
Right.
they say. So, you know, so yeah, I've already seen that where they
Right. They
can
move.
place
Yeah.
it does this in this part of the story, but now it plays this in this other part of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not saying, you know, my interpretations are right. I'm trying to give you the tools that you
Mm-hmm.
and your wisdom keepers and other, um, you know, other wise people can use these tools, or say, oh, I don't like Dave's tools, but, you know, do with them what you feel is right. I'm showing you,
Yeah.
you know, the tools that I think will help and I'll show you some of my interpretations, but, yeah, I think
Yeah.
this is,
But I think because, yeah, we have so many variations of the
mm,
creation story
mhm,
that I think they serve different purposes.
mhm,
And you know, the two I sent you are very, very similar.
right,
Next one you'll see overall it's similar, but it goes in different patterns and so they might be a different interpretation and plays a different role in the sky. Like maybe it's one more about morality versus
mhm,
one is okay, here's an actual timeline of the events. So I think that's why we have so many versions of them. But
right.
it's, yeah, they're all playing different roles. So
And I think that happened all over the world, because now we have all
mhm.
these different myths around the world that have clear parallels, but they have, you know, differences too. And because over the millennia, some different interpretations or different angles were introduced, but they're all sharing the same foundation of the star. So let me,
Mhm.
uh, I'll kind of try and go a little faster through this part. There's Sagittarius that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Sagittarius, a very important constellation. Doesn't always play a woman, but as you can see by the outline, often plays a woman, often a very beautiful
Mhm.
goddess. Like in ancient Greece, many different beautiful goddesses are associated with Sagittarius. There's Sagittarius, but also gods too. So, like in the ancient Greek myths, uh, the goddess Artemis, who has a bow, is associated with Sagittarius. I've shown a lot of evidence to support that. But she has a twin brother, Apollo. He also has a bow. And I show some arguments that he's probably Sagittarius too. And of course, they're twins. So all these
Mhm.
constellations can play both a male or a female in different stories. It's like they just put on different, the ancient myths use them, but they often have like Sagittarius has special connotations because Sagittarius is right next to that bright part of the Milky Way. Same thing with Ophiuchus. Very important location with that bright part of the Milky Way right there. And it's the second birth.
Yeah.
So if you have two mothers, a lot of times one mother will be Virgo and one mother will be Sagittarius, the second birth, the spiritual birth. The first one will be the physical birth. And in a lot of these stories around the world, the first child, you would think that the first child is going to be like the more honored one. Like in the Bible, Jacob and Esau. Esau is the older brother, but Jacob is the second child. And it's talking about the second birth, the spiritual birth. That's the one that we got to pay more attention to. It's like, yeah, you had a physical birth, but you can't do much about that. That's a long time ago and you don't even remember it. The spiritual birth, that's what you've got to be trying to get back to, reconnect with who you are, reconnect with spirit, reconnect with other people, reconnect with nature and the wide universe and all the things that we become disconnected from. That's what the second birth is about, I believe. So the second mother is very important, Sagittarius there. I only show a few more here before we start to get into some of the stories. Very important, two birds flying up and down in the Milky Way. So here is this one bird, looks like it's flying downwards, long neck, like a swan. So that constellation is traditionally in the West called by this Latin name that means a swan, Cygnus. That's the Latin word for a swan, and a baby swan we call a cygnet, a baby swan. But long neck, you know, you could be a duck. I noticed there's some ducks in the story. And then there's another bird down here is Aquila the eagle. Doesn't look very big on the screen. It is a big constellation in the night sky. It is an impressive looking constellation. And to me, when I see it outside, it looks more like a bat than an eagle. And I noticed there's a bat, I think, in the Onondaga story. But in many myths,
I was actually, we have another myth that I have in my presentation, Deonyot. That's his Seneca name, so I'm not exactly sure if it's appropriate, but I think that's also Aquila. And he wanders the Milky Way gathering souls. And he has the face of a hawk, the body of a panther, the wings of a vulture, and I forget what, claws like a hawk. And basically, whenever you see his tail, if you see a comet through the night sky, it's his tail, and he gathers souls for the angel of death, basically, is what he does. So, you know, the pathway of spirits obviously being the Milky Way, so I was wondering if that was either Cygnus or Aquila, but I think Aquila might be a better candidate yet, but still needs to do research on it.
Right, yeah. Well, that's in those two great birds of the Milky Way. They're very, very prominent and pretty easy to see constellations, and they do show up in a lot of myths and sacred traditions around the world. So I draw them in, and then there's also in between them a little arrow right there. You can see it right above Aquila, right next to the words dark rift. That is called Sagitta, which means arrow. So Sagittarius means arrow, you know, arrower, bow, you know, archer, but really means an arrower. So Sagitta is the arrow, and I know in the story there's an arrow that they put between the man and the wife. We'll talk about some of my interpretations of that in a minute. I think that's most of the constellations. Let me see if there's any others I wanted to point out before we go on. Sagitta, Dark Rift. I think that's most of them. I've got a few parts of the story that I've called out to examine. So let's start off with this. It's in both of the accounts that you shared. The father who dies, and then they put him in a case or a casket, and they put it up in a high place. And I would argue that's I'm pretty confident that's Ophiuchus. And the daughter going to see the casket would be Sagittarius in that case, most likely. And why do I say I'm pretty confident it's Ophiuchus? Well, Ophiuchus, if you look at it, looks like a casket. I mean, if you look at that central body, it looks kind of like a casket or a coffin, right? Also, though, in ancient myths around the world, we have figures who the father dies in the myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Osiris is the father, Isis is the mother, and Horus is the son in that case. And Osiris gets turned into a mummy. You know, you can see his face is green. He's wrapped in white mummy cloths. Look at Ophiuchus. This two serpent halves could be wrappings of a mummy, or, you know, the grave winding sheet when you wind up a body in a shroud. They call it a shroud when it's wrapped around a body. And you can see Ophiuchus looks like a central figure with a shroud around it. And that, and I've done some argument in that book that you have, The Ancient Worldwide System, the big thick one, you know, the revised version, 2nd edition, where I argue that Osiris is associated with Ophiuchus, almost for sure. Now, you'll hear everybody telling you, oh, Osiris is Orion. He's Orion. He's Orion. I don't deny that he could also be Orion sometimes. And I talk about that in the book, but I say he's clearly also Ophiuchus, and he's the father who dies. And he's actually encased in a casket, and then a tree grows around him in the Osiris story. I won't go too far into the myths, but of ancient Egypt here, but it's some parallels. It's to me, some pretty strong parallels. And we have that kind of pattern also happening in the Maya story of the Popol Vuh, where the hero twins, there's a father who dies. There's like an original set of twins, and they put one of them, the father's head in a gourd or a calabash or like a pumpkin, and hang it on a tree, and then they get advice from it, much like this daughter is getting advice from her father who's in the casket. So it's a pattern. So I would suggest that that is probably the father who dies is probably Ophiuchus, and the daughter in this case is probably Sagittarius, because you can see her conversing. And there are many myths around the world where a Sagittarius figure is conversing with an Ophiuchus figure. I show it again and again, like in the Norse myths, a figure associated with Sagittarius will be talking to a giant, you know, a wise giant Ophiuchus figure. You can see it's kind of gigantic looking. So let me see if I have anything else on this. Dark Rift. Oh yeah. So when the father tells the daughter, now I want you to go along the path and don't stop, you know, people are going to talk to you. Don't listen to them. And you'll know you're on the right path when you find a maple log going across the river, right? Wasn't there and she goes along the path. Log. Yeah. And well, there's a log across the river, the Dark Rift, right next to the, and she doesn't have to go very far even. It says in some of the accounts, you know, they emphasize, you know, this log isn't very far. It's pretty close. But she turns back because she's not sure. She's like, there's a log.
Yeah, she thought it was going to take her a day. Yeah, she thought it would take her a whole day to get there, and it only took her like a little while to get there. And it's like, oh, I guess I'm lost, so I have to go back and
why does she have to go back? It's like her father told her there'd be a log, but still she has to go back. Why does she have to go back? Look at the outline of Sagittarius. Oh yeah, I put a label there. So I think that river crossing log is the Dark Rift that we talked about already. But the daughter, if she's Sagittarius, Sagittarius figures in myths around the world are walking one way, looking back the other way. Now look at this ancient Greek vase. This is from about 500 BC, and it is depicting the goddess Artemis that I talked a little bit about. Artemis is the goddess who has a bow, and this is a myth called Artemis and Actaeon. Unfortunate Prince Actaeon is being devoured by his own dogs there, and she's pointing her bow at him. Look at how the ancient artist has made the outline of the goddess to match up with Sagittarius. You see how the body posture is the same as Sagittarius? See how the bow, the angle of the bow is the same as Sagittarius? Even Sagittarius has that plume on the top of the head.
Yeah, coming out of the head. Yeah,
and she's got like a, whatever she's got on her back, whether it's a quiver of arrows or a sword, it's got a little tassel on top just to show, hey, you know, be sure we're talking about the same constellation here. But look at how she's walking one way and turning back the other way. This is a characteristic in myths around the world of Sagittarius figures. They look, the constellation looks like it's walking one way but turning back the other way. And in the story, we have the daughter turning back even though she got perfect directions, but then she goes back, am I going the right way?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a clue that this is probably a Sagittarius figure. And I'll tell you another myth where there's an important turning back, or you're not supposed to look back. And you probably know this myth. The Greek myth is called the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, but it's the journey to the underworld where the husband is not supposed to look back. It happens to be very, very prevalent among all the nations of North America. Have this story of the wife who dies and the husband goes down to the underworld, but he has to not do something, like he has to follow certain instructions, and if he messes them up, then his wife won't get to come back. And in the Greek myths, it's Orpheus and Eurydice, and he's told he should not look back. This Orpheus and Eurydice, that's how they're spelled.
Mm-hmm.
Orpheus is the husband. His wife, Eurydice, steps on a snake on their wedding day. That's like Ophiuchus above Scorpio. But anyway, she goes down to the underworld. Orpheus goes down and asks the king and queen of the underworld, can I have her back? You know, I love my wife and she died on our wedding day. And they say, okay, Orpheus, you can, but you have to trust us and don't look back. So that story about don't look back is also based on these constellations and this not looking back. And there have been studies, you know, you mentioned it when we were together in Washington. There was, you know, a Jesuit author in the 1600s who said, oh, this is really strange. I came over here to the Americas and they seem to have the Orpheus and Eurydice story. And he called it, you know, the Orpheus and Eurydice. Well, I always say, why do you say it's the Orpheus and Eurydice story? Because in the native indigenous nations, they actually seem to preserve more of the story. In their versions, the husband has to go across a bridge and he gets scared. You know, there's an eagle that's going to try and scare him, or a bird. And if he falls into the water, he'll turn into a fish. And there's a fish right to the left of Sagita. I didn't outline it. That's Delphinus, the dolphin, is what that constellation is called. In other words, this story, and it's been recorded. I just put some of the names, and these are the way the names were spelled, like in some of the accounts in like the 1930s, when people were writing books calling it the Orpheus tradition among the Native Americans. This story is found all the way from the Northwest, all the way down to the Navajo and the Zuni in the Southwest, all the way across to, you see the Huron there. I don't know if there are versions in other Iroquois nations.
Well, the Seneca, right?
Oh,
Seneca
yeah, Seneca
are
too, yeah.
Iroquois.
So there you go. This
and
is
the Huron are like just north of us.
Mm.
They're considered Iroquoian, but they're not part of the Iroquois Confederacy.
So these researchers in past decades have found, you know, this pattern of don't look back, or the husband who goes down to the underworld. It's one of the most prevalent myths around the world. There's a version in Japan. There's a version where the husband goes down to try and bring back the wife in Japan. It's around the world, and I believe it's based on these constellations. So I'll move on from the father who dies and talks about the river crossing. Oh, but there is one part. Oh yeah, she goes and she gets a bunch of meat, you know, to come back with, and she has to put the forehead strap. And, you know, I think we've shown some pretty strong evidence that the daughter is probably associated with Sagittarius, and maybe in this case, the forehead strap might be associated with that very distinctive feature of the constellation Sagittarius. You know, it could be a feather. It could be, you know, you see in the ancient Greek artwork, it could be a tassel, but in this case, it might be the forehead strap. I'm not positive about that. It's just a suggestion. But we're seeing lots of evidence that this interpretation might be have some evidence to support it. So I think from there I move on to another aspect of the creation story that you shared. I gotta keep going. I mean, I could go for hours and hours, but oh yeah. So then she brings back the meat. I know it's late for you back there. She brings back the meat,
No,
but then
but I could listen for hours too. So
yeah, obviously I'm very very passionate about trying to discover these ancient connections too that are, I think, so important to the world. And it shows that we're all connected, you know, instead of going around and saying, oh no, you're wrong, my stories are right and yours are wrong. It shows, oh, hey, guess what? They're all based on the same thing. So the grain from heaven is a good example of that, because we do have manna from heaven in the myths of the Bible, right? The stories of the Bible, we have manna from heaven. In this story, she brings back the meat, but also she says, hey, you have to take the roofs off of your lodges because grain is going to start falling. Well, we find that in stories around the world too. So this is not Moses, but you can see some similarities to Moses. You see he's depicted with a beard. He's got a staff, and what's on the staff? A snake. This is actually a Greek god whose name is Asclepios. In ancient Greek, that's the way they would spell it, with a K and with an OS at the end. But usually in modern times, we call him Asclepius or Asclepius. But he's the god of healing, actually. And he's born of a Virgo figure. So you can guess what constellation I think he might be lined up with. He's got a staff that is like a snake. He's got some Moses characteristics. Another Ophiuchus character for sure. Well, the interesting thing about, so he's got a staff, he's got a snake, he's born from a Virgo character. There's a story about his birth. I won't go into it right now, but where there's a crow watching for his birth, and a crow is looking right at Virgo.
Yeah, so it'd be Corvus, right?
Exactly. You're right. We'll see Corvus a little later. I show it a little later, but there's Asclepius, and he actually has a staff in one hand, but in his other hand, he's got a little fig or something there in his other hand. Actually, there's scholars of ancient Greece and ancient Greek mythology know that he had this association. Oh, and also he was born out of the side of his mother, which is interesting, kind of like the armpit story that we were talking about. That's a woodcut from 1549, but you can see it's talking about the birth of Asclepius. You can see the letters up there spelling Asclepiae. It says the birth Ortus Asclepiae, the birth of Asclepius. But anyway, he's also associated with this, with honey cakes, little cakes of honey. If you were worshiping Asclepius, and he's the god of healing, if you had to give an offering to him, you would bring these little special honey cakes to his temples. And I believe that is probably associated here. But in the Bible, the manna from heaven is described as small and round and tasting like honey. So the manna that comes from heaven, and remember, it's associated with Moses. Moses is associated with Ophiuchus. Asclepius is associated with Ophiuchus. Moses is associated with manna from heaven. Asclepius is associated with small little cakes that taste like honey, just like the manna in the Bible story. So these are all connected. And so I believe that this rain of grain from heaven is probably another parallel to what we see in the Bible of the manna from heaven, what we see in the Asclepius story of the honey cake, and these aren't things that Christians would be likely to pick up on. These are not things that Christians aren't going around the world saying, Moses, he's associated with this constellation Ophiuchus, same as Asclepius, who has a rod with a staff on it too. That would be like something they don't want to tell you, because it shows that they're actually all connected, not one's right and the others are wrong. So also, they have to take the roof off of the building. Now, this is a story from the Bible also. This is David, who I'm named after, David. And of course, he has a weakness for women. He sees Bathsheba. Well, where is he when he sees Bathsheba? She's bathing she's taking her bath. And David is actually, the Bible tells us, up on the roof. He's actually up on the roof. So in this painting, the artist, this is, I think, from the early 1600s, paints David up on the roof there. You see David up on the roof. He's kind of tiny, but he's up on the roof. Yeah. David is associated with the constellation Hercules. I can show that. I talk about that in other books. But why is David up on the roof? Well, look at the figure of Ophiuchus, how we said, he's actually looking down and seeing, again, I think Sagittarius. Look at her long braid of hair. She's bathing. That wide part of the Milky Way could be a pool or a bath where Sagittarius is bathing. That a lot of times a goddess is bathing. We saw Artemis the reason Actaeon got killed by his own dogs is because he saw Artemis bathing in the river. But he's up on the roof because the top of Ophiuchus looks like a roof. I've outlined it there. Well, in the story, they say you got to take the lodges, you got to take the roof off the lodges for the grain to come in. And so to me, this is a lot of kind of like little clues. It's not super obvious or clear. It's not something that a Christian missionary wouldn't come over and give you all those clues, because they don't typically know these connections to the stars from even their own stories, right? This is something that is not well known. These connections are things that I've, obviously I think these are the right connections, but I don't think anyone else has written about these this way that I'm telling you right now. So I think that's what's going on in this story. Is it's an echo, or it's this ancient system that's around the world, shows up in different cultures in similar ways, not exactly the same ways, but similar ways. So that's what I think about that part of the grain from heaven. Oops, I'm not trying to push that button. Let me go on. I'll just keep driving on, and you can jump in at any time you want. But let's go to this wild cherry or dogwood tree. So remember when I introduced Hercules, I said, very interesting aspect of Hercules is the constellation looks like a powerful figure with a weapon reaching down. That reaching down is important. Square head is important, but could also be a tree. And so let me de-emphasize the outline and show you the alternate outline. We start with that square head, and it has 4 like branches coming off of it. Let me show you the 4 branches. See how?
Oh yeah, you use that as the whirlwind or the spider, and
whirlwind sometimes, spider sometimes, and also a tree sometimes. Often a fig tree, because fig trees, which have kind of like branches going in all directions and kind of scraggly looking like that, and that's why a lot of times in myths we'll see a fig tree, or in the Bible, Jesus will talk to a fig tree at one point in the Bible, and he actually curses the fig tree and says, "Go," But sometimes the tree, you can imagine an additional line kind of connecting down here to Ophiuchus right there. So like growing up out of the mountain. Ophiuchus could also look like a mountain. So that's the cherry tree, or the dogwood tree, I believe. That, and it's also possible that maple sapling, might be associated with Hercules, I believe, because Hercules and Ophiuchus could be having battles between each other. And so we'll get to that a little bit later. But I think that tree, and then in the story, you pull up the tree, and then there's the path down to the underworld, and you put the tree back down there. Well, the path to the underworld is connected to the Milky Way in many myths, and you talked about the spirit path, and the whole, or pulling up like a stump. Sometimes Ophiuchus is like a stump. We'll see a myth where Ophiuchus is like a stump. When the tree gets cut down, all that's left is Ophiuchus, and it's like a tunnel down into the waters below. Just like in your story, the waters below. So we'll see that in a little bit. Then there's this part about these diving animals. I'm not positive about these diving animals. They're tough. they're tricky. I'm not confident, but I'll give you some just quick suggestions that I think it might be. There's this figure here that's called Lupus the wolf, and it looks like it's diving right down underneath the earth right there. You see that? I'll outline it in a second, but I'm going to take away the ground so you can see the whole, half of it's under the ground, because it's kind of a southern constellation, but it's like it's digging down. It's like it's got its mouth right into the earth. Let me take away the horizon, which you can do in Stellarium, and see the constellations that are below the horizon. And now we see, this is the constellation called Lupus. At least that's the Latin name for it. But it could be, maybe it's a muskrat, maybe it's a beaver. Look at that kind of fat tail that it's got there. The different animals dive down, and some are successful, or one is successful, the rest are not. But it looks like it's diving down below Ophiuchus and all that up there. See that? And also it's right next to, and it happens in the story that, right after there's a deer right next door. And this constellation here is Centaurus. it didn't quite fit in my screenshot, but Centaurus is usually envisioned as a man with a centaur torso, you know, a human torso above a horse body. But I have argued in many different places, in many different myths, that Centaurus, I'll put in the Centaurus, often plays a role of a deer. You can see instead of,
take that middle line out.
Yeah, you take that middle line out, and now it's the antlers, and his body becomes the face of the deer instead of being the torso of the man. So instead of the hands, those become the antlers. And so right there in the story, there's a deer. You know, it talks about she went down to the underworld, and you know, he pushed her down the hole. He took out the sapling, or he took out the dog. We pushed her down the hole, and then you know, she went down, and then it was water, and then deer. So and ducks. You know, we talked about the birds on the Milky Way. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. I'm going a little fast to move along, but I think that might be the kind of the diving animals. Also the turtle, you know, I've mentioned that in some times I thought a turtle might be Aquila, but later, this is the book that you have. I'm talking about some of the myths of ancient India. There's actually a god, the god Vishnu, has many avatars. And Vishnu, for sure, is Ophiuchus. And many of his avatars are Ophiuchus too. Like Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. We could get into this, but the evidence is overwhelming. There's like tons of ancient artwork that shows that Vishnu is associated with Ophiuchus, and there's tons of artwork that shows that Krishna is associated with Ophiuchus. Well, another avatar of Vishnu, these are some pages from my book that you have, The Ancient Worldwide System, pages 582, 583. I'm talking about Vishnu's turtle avatar, and you can see it's down at the bottom of the world. On the left there's a picture of the churning of this mountain. The mountain looks like a pole because it's Ophiuchus, but it's on top of a tortoise down there at the bottom, a turtle. And and I argue that turtle could also maybe be Ophiuchus. At first I wasn't sure what's the turtle, but then when I realized it's an avatar of Vishnu in the myths of ancient India, and many of those avatars are also Ophiuchus, and Vishnu's turning into these different things, well then, I realized, you know, Ophiuchus could actually look like a tortoise. I know it doesn't look like a tortoise, but think of that central body as the humped shell, and then it's got a head sticking out one side, a tail sticking out the other side, so I put a little picture on top of it. That's my argument that it's possible that when they build the earth on top of the shell, it could be Ophiuchus again. And that is not without parallels around the world, because in the ancient Egypt myths, they build the earth on top of a pyramid stone, the Ben stone. The god who creates, it's in the same book, I talk about the creation story of ancient Egypt. The god who's making the earth rise up out of the waters is a Hercules figure, and the earth that's rising up out of the waters again is Ophiuchus, and this time the stone is the triangle on top. So it's a parallel in ancient Egypt. It's like, how did we have parallels around the world like this? But India, Egypt, the creation stories that you shared, I think these parallels, they're not exactly the same, but you can see that the arguments for the constellations are similar.
Yeah, I think it's Graham Hancock would say the influence. There's a similar influence over all of them.
Yeah, and Graham Hancock also says we are a species with amnesia. We've forgotten amnesia. And I think that's, you know, I think it's so wonderful that you and the Wisdom Keepers are continuing to explore your myths, because you know how important they are and you don't want to forget them and you want to learn more about them. And it's my opinion that the whole world is like that. Like, we have forgotten, and we have to go, we have to do the same thing that you're doing with all the myths to show how they're connected and to honor the ancestors who gave them to us. So so I think that's all I have on this particular story, and I move on to one who has a deep fringe along his arms and legs. What is that? What could that be? Remember, this is the daughter, I guess the granddaughter.
The father of the twins.
That's right. And he says, you know, well, actually, or is it the grandmother? I guess this is the father. He says, when she says, well, one who has a deep fringe along his legs and arms came, and he said, oh, you can marry that one, or maybe that's a possibility.
It's the mother
I
that
think it
allows
is
her.
the mother. Yeah.
Yeah, because at this point it's just the mother and the daughter. So
Right. And that is a parallel that I see from other myths around the world. Again, this is the goddess Athena. This is an ancient statue from Greece. The goddess Athena, she wears a special garment called the aegis. It's a word we still have today, and it's fringed with serpents from the head of Medusa. But she has these tassels. This is an ancient statue from the Acropolis in ancient Athens. Here's another angle on it. You can see it's got deep fringe. In her case, it's the fringe of serpents. But she is for sure, I've argued at length with a lot of evidence, associated with Ophiuchus. And you would think, how is so much associated with Ophiuchus? Because it's a really pivotal constellation. It even looks like a pivot. It's associated with wisdom. Athena is a goddess of wisdom. It's not always a good character. Sometimes it's a bad character. But here's another picture of her. You see the fringe on her aegis. And it even has the picture of the Medusa on her chest there with its tongue sticking out. It's very small. But she has a little, well, first of all, she's carrying a spear. Ophiuchus figures a lot of times carry a spear, or in the case of Moses, it's a staff, or in the case of Asclepius, it's a staff with a snake on it. But a lot of times it's a spear, and she has a spear for sure. So that's one clue that she's Ophiuchus. Also, she has a helmet, which her accompanying bird is an owl. And I think that owl is right there in Ophiuchus, that little part can play the owl. And what plays her helmet with the big crest? I haven't showed this constellation yet, but right above the owl there is
I remember that.
Corona Borealis, a northern crown.
Corona Borealis,
Corona Borealis, a northern crown. Very important constellation. I don't see it as much in these myths, although it could be a comb. You see how it could be a comb?
Yeah.
It's kind of like got, if you imagine kind of a bunch of lines in between, it could be a comb. And then, Boötes, maybe Hercules is combing Boötes' hair. I think you're right that Sagittarius, she's got that feature coming out of the top of her head. That could be a comb. Also, Boötes has got this thing sticking out of his head. That could be a comb. When Flint is born, he's got this thing on his head, a comb on his head, and he comes out of the armpit. So Boötes too. But anyway, I think that is the crest of the helmet. I've put an arrow down on her helmet there. But I think that figure with the deep fringe is Ophiuchus again. And Sagittarius,
But it plays in well because it turns out that, like you said, what before he's a great turtle. Now he's the guy with the fringe. And then later on, it turns out that the father of the twins is the great turtle.
And that's what I think is going on in these myths. It's like the same. It's like Ophiuchus. Okay, now you have to be this character. Now you have to be this character. But it's like they have the same characteristics. It's like every time that actor plays a part, the actor has kind of this certain role. Well, I'm a wise character. I'm a fatherly character. I'm a whatever. In different myths, it's different things. So that's a great, I'm glad you pointed that out. So I think that's all I have on this one. Oh, another clue about Athena being Ophiuchus. I can't resist. She's born from the head of Zeus. She's born out of the head of Zeus. So Ophiuchus could be born out of Virgo, but in other myths, sometimes Ophiuchus characters are descended from Zeus, and in the Athena myth, she springs right out of the head of Zeus. Zeus one day says, "I got a terrible headache," and then Athena comes out wearing a helmet and a spear. So that's another clue that she is associated with the Ophiuchus. Well, if she's associated with Ophiuchus and she has a deep fringe, then I believe that's a good clue. It's not positive, but like you said, we have other evidence that tends to support it. I think that man wearing a deep fringe around his legs and arms. And I could show you other artwork where there's Ophiuchus characters for sure who have a fringe. In the interest of time, I didn't put it in, but the Pylos combat agate that I've talked about, it was only discovered in 2017 in Greece, and it's from 1500 BC, so 3,500 years ago. There's a clear Ophiuchus figure, and he's got kind of a fringy it's got incredible detail in it. I should have shown it actually, probably now that I'm talking about it, but you can go look up the Pilot's Combat Agate. The Ophiuchus figure in there has a deep fringe on his garments in the artwork. So, oh yeah, the maiden, I argue, is Sagittarius. We can see why, you know. They're not exactly feet to feet. I don't know, you know, but they sleep with an arrow between them, right? And there's Sagitta, right? The arrow right up next to the words Dark Rift. Or you've got the spear.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I was thinking that the maiden was Virgo and Boot is because they kind of look like they're sleeping feet to feet.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and she ends up falling down
that's
to the
true.
water world. So and she is a virgin birth. So that was kind of my thinking of it on that, and then as well, in the midst of what the thing was always on his mind, he says is the fire dragon, and you have Draco just above Boots as well.
That's true. You do. You can see it in Boötes is how I say it. But
Boötes, okay.
Yeah, you can see Draco way up there. Boötes. But Draco is right above Hercules. The head of Draco is right above the H in Hercules there. You're right.
Yeah. And another interesting one I didn't send you, the Seneca version. When she's falling, the fire dragon escorts her down. And I saw this in one of your other ones that you mentioned. And the fire dragon gives her a mortar and a pestle as she's falling. So that's a good quote from Virgo, So that's as I'm saying. It's depending on the story, because like I said, some of the stories don't have that. So that's why I'm trying to. It's like every story has to be interpreted differently. Based on the time of events. So.
And sometimes, you know, there's not enough clues to be positive. I mean, I think what's clear though is there's enough clues that these stories are related to the stars and are related to the whole family of humanity around the world. That's what I think.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to be positive about every single thing, but we can see, there's a lot of clues here that these stories connect to the stars. So also that, you know, there's the bow is in between them. So maybe the bow and arrow in between them. I don't know. But that was my arguments there. Let me, there's the arrow. I circled it up there for people who want to see Sagitta right up there. So those are parts of the story. Looks like one of my arrows came in a little too soon, but the next thing is that, you know, she has twins, right? And the twins come out of Virgo. So that's a pretty good argument that she, at least when she gets pregnant, you know, Sagittarius is like, it looks like, you know, often is a virgin goddess, like Artemis is a virgin goddess. But Virgo looks like she's giving birth. So maybe she could start as Sagittarius and then later get pregnant and be Virgo. But either way, there's this part about the twins going out the other way. And I've already argued that, you know, Boötes comes out the armpit maybe. But there's a parallel I wanted to share with Scorpio. And I need the whole, I need to be able to show Corvus the crow down there, which I will show in a second. We've already talked about it for a little bit. But here's Virgo again. And this is the story of Maui and Hina. And it's in that same ancient worldwide system that you have when I'm talking about the myths of the Pacific.
Story,
the cultures of the Pacific. It's actually the death of Maui. Maui wants to get rid of death on Earth. And Hina is this goddess of death. And she's a terrifying goddess. And Maui says, if I can slay her, then there'll be no more death on Earth. And mankind will live without death. And so he decides to turn himself into a worm, at least in one version of the story. He turns himself into a worm, and he says, I'm going to go back through her the opposite direction of the way people are born. And that will undo, you know, the curse of death. And so he's going to go back in. And that's very similar in the story where you have the twins arguing, and one twin says, hey, we got to go out this way. And the other one says, no, let's go the opposite way. It's just like Maui going the opposite way. And you can see how Scorpio looks like a worm. And he turns himself into a worm, and he says, I'm going to go in through, while she's asleep. And Virgo looks like she might be asleep there. And he's going to go in and go up in it. And he says, listen, if I get all the way and come out her mouth, she'll be dead after that for sure. And the birds are coming around to watch. And he says, do not laugh. It might look funny when I'm wiggling to get into Hina, but you must not laugh, because if she wakes up, I'm toast. And of course, the little bird, that laughs. Oh yeah, Scorpio. He turns himself into a worm in one version. The little bird that laughs is Corvus the crow. I like to outline it like that. That's the way it looks in the sky, like a fat little crow, but he's got a little tail.
Yeah.
And in the story, there's Corvus. In the story, it's the bird that's called a wagtail that laughs at Maui when he's going through. A wagtail. And you can see Corvus has a little kind of funny little tail hanging down. So I think that story is very similar to this story, and it shows a parallel. And so it does, like you said, it's some supporting evidence that when the twins are born, it's a Virgo. It's just a little opposite from the Pacific story.
Yeah.
So let me get into the twins. Twins in myth are very, very, very prevalent around the world and very important. Like I said, I believe the twins have to do with reconnecting with who we are. It's like we're divided, but we have to reconnect with who we are. At least that's one layer of meaning in many, many myths around the world. And often the twins are wrestling with each other or struggling with each other, just as we see in this story. So I've got a list of many twins around the world. One set of twins that's famous from the Greek myths is Castor and Pollux. There's a picture of them from an ancient Greek artwork. They're associated with horses in ancient Greece and also ancient India. But there's twins around the world, not always associated with horses. Castor and Pollux being two famous twins. The important thing about the Castor and Pollux and many of these twins is one is a divine twin, one is a mortal twin. Mortal, can die. Castor in this case is the mortal brother. Pollux is the immortal brother. So that's an important pattern that we see around the world. Then there's Gilgamesh and Enkidu in ancient Babylon and ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer, Akkadian. Again, in this case, one of the twins goes down to the underworld. In the story of Gilgamesh, it's Enkidu dies and goes to the underworld. In Castor and Pollux, Castor dies and goes to the underworld. It's like we have a lower twin that's our mortal self, and the higher self is indestructible or immortal. So there's Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Hunahpu and Xbalanque, you might have heard in the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the sacred text of the Maya, there's hero twins. There's actually two sets of hero twins, but the ones that go down to the underworld to have the ball game in the ball court under the world, and the lords of death try and set all these traps for them. The lords of the underworld are Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Hopefully I'm saying their names right, but here's a picture of them from a Maya text, the hero twins down there in the underworld. Many of the Maya texts, of course, were destroyed by the Spanish priests when they came over in the 1500s, but some have survived. And the Popol Vuh it was written after the invasion, but it was the elders, again, the wisdom keepers were preserving it. And sometimes scholars will say, oh, this seems like a insertion from the, Christian, but it might be, just as we were talking about, that no, it's a pattern that's found around the world. People don't know that all the myths are connected, but they're clearly connected. So anyway, continuing with more twins around the world, Nakul and Sahadev are twins in the myths of ancient India, in the Mahabharata of ancient India. Usually their names are pronounced without that last A, is usually silent. So it's like Nakul and Sahadev, I think. Yeah, is usually how they say it, I think. Heracles, a lot of people don't know Heracles has a twin. He's the son of Zeus, but he has a twin brother who's the son of the ordinary father. So that's a pattern again. It's like one is semi-divine, one is just ordinary. And even in the Bible, we have twins, Jacob and Esau, I talked about. And a lot of times it's the first one is not really the twin that carries the promise. It's the second one. And that's because I believe the second birth is the spiritual birth. The first birth is the physical birth. And Esau is very hairy. He's the first twin. That's the physical birth. That's the mortal body. Same thing with Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Enkidu is very hairy. It's like that's the mortal self or the physical self. And then there's this more spiritual side, our spiritual twin or our higher self that we have to listen to and get in touch with. Our higher self is trying to tell us things, but a lot of times our our doubts and things keep us from hearing it in the myths. And even in the New Testament, Jesus has a twin. Thomas is called the twin, and Jesus is the divine twin. Thomas is the mortal twin, the doubting twin. Anyway, I won't go into that too much, but the point is there's twins around the world, and clearly there's twins in this creation story that you shared in both versions, right? Very important twins, obviously. So I just wanted to point that out, and then talk a little bit more about, oh yeah, well then the twins come out and one kills the mother, and then the grandmother says, which one of you did that? And then they kind of argue about it, and Flint is actually the one who I think talked them into going through the opposite direction, but she throws the other one into the reeds, right? Is that how it works? Yeah.
Yeah, she throws the one that actually didn't kill her. She throws him into the reeds. So
a baby cast among the reeds or in the swampy marshes is one of the most common patterns around the world. It's so important. It's so important because we see it around the world. I'm going to show a few. You might be able to think of some. This one is very ancient from Mesopotamia. Sargon, the great king of Akkad or Agad. His mother was a high priestess. He says, I did not know my father. This is also similar pattern. My city is Zaparanu, which lies on the Euphrates bank. Okay, so it's on the bank of the Euphrates. Well, that could be a real river that he's talking about, or it could be, again, the Milky Way.
Yeah.
My mother, the high priestess, conceived me. She bore me in secret. She couldn't tell anyone. She placed me, I put it in red, in a reed basket. Reeds. Always it's a reed basket or it's among the reeds. She sealed my hatch with pitch. A lot of times there's like, you put sticky tar or oil, bitumen.
Yeah.
Bitumen is a kind of oil that's found in Canada a lot. They call it bitumen, but that same word is related to pitch. She left me to the river. So we see this again and again. So that's the ancient Mesopotamia, which is before the Bible times, at least are thought of. But all these myths are very, very ancient. I think they all have their source in a very ancient time. Here's the Bible version. Who gets placed in the river in the Bible as a baby? Why, that would be baby Moses again. So which one? Well, Moses is Ophiuchus. And there was a man of the house of Levi. This is from Exodus chapter 2. Took a wife, daughter of Levi, a woman conceived, bare a son, but she had to hide the son. She couldn't hide him any longer. She took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, again, put the child therein. She laid it in the flags. That means the reeds by the river's bank, the grasses that look like flags. And his sister stood afar off. So that's Exodus. And then we get it again in India. The princess Kunti was given a boon by the sage Durvasa. I won't read the whole thing, but she has to keep the child secret. So she keeps the child secret. She gives birth. She sets the baby afloat in the river in a wooden box. Same pattern over and over. And by the way, this baby is called Karna. It says right there, the great hero Karna. Now Karna, his body, when he's born, is made out of armor. He has a natural suit of armor that's like welded to his flesh. And he has natural earrings that are like welded to his ears. To me, this is a lot like Flint. Karna is like this hero, but he never gets any respect. He wants to be a hero, but in these ancient Indian stories, he doesn't get to be. He tries to be a king and then they like make fun of him. But he's a good guy, but he's also a bad guy. He fights on the wrong side in the big battle, but we have a lot of sympathy for him. It's like Karna, he just kind of gets a raw deal all the time. And to me, he's a lot like Flint. He's born, his body's already like, wait a minute, it's like metal. What's up with that? And he's put into a river. Now I know I guess Flint isn't the one who gets put into the river, but the Moses figure, I actually think Flint in this case is associated with Ophiuchus maybe. We'll talk about that. And you can see why Ophiuchus could be among the reeds. First of all, look at those two things on either side of the central body. Those could be big, giant, like cattails or bulrushes.
Yeah, plus with the Milky Way, water, obviously, and reeds grow around the water,
Yeah, and also even Scorpio, I'll show how Scorpio, with many heads could also be reeds or grasses and marshy stuff. Or he could be a little boat, like an ark. But anyway, here's more babies that are cast among the reeds. In Japan, Izanami and Izanagi are the two creator god and goddess. They're also brother and sister, but they they have a child, but because she spoke first, the child is born without bones, and they call him the leech child, Hiruko, and they place him in a boat of reeds and let it float away. That's definitely associated with Scorpio, the leech child. And in the Pacific, Maui, I mentioned briefly before that Maui gets thrown into the river, and he gets rescued by his grandfather. And there's some, this is from the Arawa. There's many different versions, just like, you know, you're talking about the different versions of the creation story have some slight differences between Onondaga and Mohawk and Seneca. But in the Maui stories, of course, you know, there's islands across the Pacific, but they all have the Maui stories. There's different versions, but in some of the versions, he is thrown into the waters because he has 8 heads, which is again a Scorpio reference. But he's rescued by his grandfather, which is Hercules in my argument, and I'm pretty positive about that one. Even in ancient Greece, there's baby Perseus is cast into the river, into the ocean in an ark with his mother this time. And you can read about that. His mother's name is Danae. But in the interest of kind of moving along, I guess we've been going for almost 2 hours, so I want to.
I could let you go for another 2 hours.
Awesome. Well, let me keep moving along here to finish up some of the stories with so the baby being cast into the reeds. We have also in ancient Greece we talked about, and like I said, I believe that the constellation Scorpio is important in that as well. I think it has to do with Ophiuchus. Remember, Moses is Ophiuchus, but also the leech child Hiruko in Japan is undoubtedly associated with Scorpio, which I'm going to draw in now. Here's Scorpio, and that's the way I often draw Scorpio, with multiple heads. I know that's not the way P.K. Ray draws it, but Scorpio figures will often have different number of heads in myth, sometimes 9, sometimes 8, sometimes 7, sometimes 10, because there's a lot of stars right there. And sometimes 3. There's like a 3-headed dog at the gates of the underworld in ancient Greek myth. Yeah. And the 3, go ahead.
Yeah, I like with the the Onondaga one, where I kind of interpret like the head basket being Libra, and how he shakes it 7 times, kind of like in reference to Scorpio. He shakes it 7 times to put more food in there. So
that's
I was just wondering if that
for sure
that might have tied in with that.
I didn't even think of that, but I have talked about how Libra plays the role of a basket beyond any doubt. I could show that beyond any doubt. Ophiuchus figures carry. Well, sometimes Ophiuchus figures carry a scale, you know, balances, just like Libra is a balances. Yeah. But sometimes they carry that basket. That's a great one. That's a very, very good observation, Kyle. I think that's probably right. So the baby among the reeds is definitely in this region between Ophiuchus and there's Scorpio that I just drew in. And Scorpio, sometimes Scorpio plays the role of a stalk of grain, or the grain that the dog carries in his mouth when he runs along the Milky Way and he leaves a trail of grain. I think that's Scorpio, and maybe Lupus the wolf might have carried the grain and dropped it or something. But anyway, we see this pattern. It's like these patterns that are in your stories are patterns that connect around the world to other cultures. And even if I'm not positive about this is for sure this, I'm positive that these are celestial connections in your stories, that this is going on, that this is taking place in the myths of the world. There's the animals that are hidden in the rock, and Sapling lets them out. You remember when Flint and his grandmother hide them all in the rock. This is a pattern. This is a very important pattern around the world, and it's talked about in Hamlet's Mill. Hamlet's Mill, I always mention, it was written in 1969. The authors saw that something is going on. Their interpretations are not always that helpful. In other words, they're wrong about some stuff, I'm pretty sure. But they still did us a great service by going around the world and saying, these myths are based on some ancient system that's worldwide. You know, they get, for me, credit forever for showing the amount of evidence that they showed. But they don't always, it's not always a helpful book. It's a confusing, and sometimes I think they're wrong, but you know, they were writing in 1969 and they clearly were not using H.A. Ray's outline. So that makes it harder for them to figure out the constellations. So they try and use the planets for almost everything. And that, as we can see, the constellations play a really big role. And they didn't know how to figure in the constellations because they weren't using H.A. Ray's outlines. And so the outlines that they were using were terrible. But let me show, I know it's kind of small print. I was trying to find my copy of Hamlet's Mill to take a picture of the page, but I don't know where I put it at the last moment. So this is actually a story from British Guiana, which is down in South America on the, you know, this was written in 1969. So some of these spellings might now have changed, or, you know, British Guiana might be called something else now. I don't remember, but it's down there on the kind of next to Venezuela on that side of South America.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's by French Guiana, which is somewhere down
they're all
there,
next.
so.
There was 3 Guianas, I think, at one time. I don't know if they're all still the same, but it's basically down where the Jonestown massacre happened. If you want to talk about a dark event, that's where it happened. It was in Guyana, but this is from the native indigenous people of the Akawa of British Guiana say that at the beginning of the world, the Great Spirit, Maka Naima or Maka Naima, he's a twin hero. The other is called Pia. Well, that's interesting. So we have a twin hero, Great Spirit, created birds and beasts, set his son Sigu to rule over them. He caused to spring from the earth the great and very wonderful tree, which bore a different kind of fruit on each of its branches, while around its trunk, bananas, plantains, cassava, maize, and corn of all kinds grew in profusion. Well, what's the trunk of the tree, O Fucus? And the fruit that's growing around it is, you know, I told you how I think the serpent head can play different kinds of fruit, which it does. It definitely does in Greek myths and other myths that I've seen from around the world. But so Sigu is trying to benefit the world, just like Osiris went around and tried to benefit the world, just like Sapling goes around and tries to benefit the world, right? But in this case, it says that he had a brown monkey that was lazy and mischievous there in the second paragraph, refused to assist in the help of the world. So to keep him out of mischief, Sigu told him to fetch water from a stream in a basket of open work. Well, of course, that's not going to be possible. You can't, you know, if you got a loosely knitted basket. So he's like, here, monkey, here's a task for you. Well, in the meantime,
that sounds like something you give to a private that messed up.
Exactly.
Here, go do this.
Go fix some water with a canteen with holes in it. And but then he finds out he's for some reason he's chopping down the miraculous tree, Sigu is, and he discovers that the stump is hollow and full of water, and there's all kinds of fish swimming about. So Sigu says, "Oh, I'm going to stock all the rivers with these fish," but that good idea was unexpectedly frustrated. We see down on page 28, or there's page number 218. For the water in the cavity was connected to the great reservoir somewhere in the bowels of the earth, began to overflow. And so to stop it, Sigu had to cover the stump with a closely woven basket this time. So he puts a basket over the stump. Well, that, I would argue, is the triangle on top of the central part of Ophiuchus. And who's leaning down to put the, you know, the basket there is Hercules. So Sigu is Hercules, but Hercules in other myths around the world, including in ancient India, plays a monkey figure. You could see how the weapon over his head could actually, if you connect one line to kind of where the tail would come out, would look like a monkey in a square head.
It's funny. The version I'm going to send you later.
Yeah.
It talks about, once again, he's called something different. It's called Shavaskata. Shavaskata is like flint, basically. It means like a shard of flint.
Yeah.
But after I told the woman that gave me the story and who's going to publish my book, Trina Stacy, she's the one who translated from Onondaga into Mohawk and Mohawk into English. So he's trying to copy his brother and make beings too, and one of them he messes up, and basically the sapling and he does something, and he starts screaming. He's like, "No, you're a monkey," and he's on top of a tree.
That's perfect. And there's probably
And,
not too many monkeys in
and so just
not
when you said that, so yeah, it's this monkey saying a really old version of our creation story, like the 1710 version, which I'll send to you. But it's
yeah.
long. It's like 64 pages on a PDF. So
Wow. And there's obviously not monkeys in upstate New York, or maybe there were at one time, but probably this comes from very ancient.
well, I've heard two things. We either came from the Southwest,
Mm-hmm.
or specifically the Mohawk. Um, Linguistically, we have the same ties as in Central America, Guatemala specifically.
Wow.
So, well, that's how I'm kind of tying in as well, that all these ancient myths that we have with these animals that we would never know about shows that we originated from Central America, because as we know, with Randall and the mega floods and everything, that basically anything North America got wiped out, and we have our myths that we basically started our trek through North America. We stopped on one side of the Mississippi. We lived there for a while, crossed it. We got to Cahokia in Illinois.
Yeah.
And according to our legends, the city had a population. Archaeologists say it had a population of 10,000. Our legends say we had a population of 75,000. We stayed there for a while before we moved on to upstate New York. Went up into Canada, found it was too cold for agriculture, and then we eventually came back down to upstate New York, where we eventually settled. So yeah, we obviously came from somewhere else, because this area got destroyed or was under ice. Yeah. And that's how that's the legend at that point, where I talked to Trina and said, this obviously, because there's also talk of a panther, like we don't know what those are.
Right.
But if we live in Central America, we know that. So that points to, we came from there, and that too, this is a very ancient story.
Very ancient story. And
yeah.
connected around the world, because the other monkeys too, around the world, they have the same thing.
Yeah, and the only way they managed to keep it, even though, like I said, later on we wouldn't know what a monkey or anything is because they tied it to the stars.
Yes, that's fantastic.
To keep the story. So when they tell the story, they look to the stars, and it's kind of like a bookmark.
Yes.
And say, okay, here you are in the story. So
that's great. Well, yeah, I remember that part of, in one of the accounts about the brother, Sapling is making creation, and his brother's not doing so well. And I didn't make that connection to the monkey there, but yeah.
Yeah, so, I think it's on it. No, I don't think it's one of those two versions I sent you. It's in the very old one.
I think the Onondaga did have an ape described in there at one point.
Yeah,
I think it said an ape, and I was like, well, that's unusual, an ape in the Onondaga. So this, so I think you're right. This is based on the star, or this is connected to the stars, and connected to these sacred traditions of the cultures down in South America or Central America. And so anyway, this story that I've quoted here, I believe it's a Hercules figure lifting up the basket, or placing the basket down on Ophiuchus, that's covering the water. So Ophiuchus is like a tree trunk, a stump, but it's connected to the waters under the earth. You see how it's connected to the Milky Way? Like if Ophiuchus was a trunk, the Milky Way is like the waters, and they go all the way down under the earth, and the waters come up through the, so when she falls in your story down into the underworld, eventually it's like, wait, I'm not falling through air, I'm in water. Oh, here I am, and there's ducks. Well, she's in the Milky Way, and I think she's Sagittarius. So
yeah, well, as well, right? The animals first think, one of them mentions like they think she's in the water, but then no, it turns out she's in the air.
Yeah, that is a really neat part of the story. So I wanted to bring up this myth because I think it sheds some light on the celestial connections of your sacred tradition. And then we have, of course, the two brothers that are fighting with each other, the contendings of the two brothers. And interestingly enough, in the ancient Egyptians, there's even an ancient Egyptian text that has survived from they think it's from like 1400 BC. It's called the Contendings of Horus and Seth and Horus. And they're always fighting with each other. And they're actually using bulrushes or papyrus reeds as weapons or as tug of war. Can you see the resolution isn't that great, but they've got the central pillar, just like in the myths of ancient India, and they're pulling on it, and it's not just ropes. They're actually papyrus and one other type of a bulrushes that grows in the Nile. I forget off the top of my head. One of them's holding one type, lotus. I think it's lotus and papyrus, but both of those can be seen around Ophiuchus. You see, Ophiuchus is surrounded by reeds. And so in the story, in your contendings, they ask each other, well, what do you think is your biggest weakness? Oh, it's, I'm afraid of being cut by flint. Oh, I'm afraid of being cut by bulrushes or by big, marsh reeds.
Cattails or something like that.
I actually I put the picture a screenshot because I think this is so clearly the battling between these two brothers. A weed that grows in the swampy places is called "it cuts a person," said Sapling. And then how do you say the flint's name? Tawashkaran.
Okay, and the Mohawk one is Tuscarora or something like that. Remember, in a Mohawk, a T becomes before a vowel is pronounced as a D, and a K before a vowel is pronounced as a G.
Tuscarora.
So that's,
So I believe it's most likely to me that Sapling is connected with Hercules, and Flint or Taurascoron is connected with Ophiuchus, because Taurascoron says, okay, well, I'll grab the reed that cuts a person. And so you can see Ophiuchus carrying the reed there. And then then Hercules says, oh, I'll grab some flint. Well, it looks like Hercules is reaching down to grab that part of Ophiuchus that probably gives Flint its name, right? Remember, Ophiuchus, when he's born, he already has armor. In ancient India, he's got armor. In your version, he's got flint, and he's got something coming out of his head, and it's flint-like. Well, Hercules is bending down to grab the flint. You see that?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I'm going to use your own flint against you. And Taurascoron says, I'm going to use these reeds against you. And I actually spend a lot of time in that book that you have when I'm talking about the ancient myths of Egypt, talking about the contendings of Set and Horus. And it's very clear to me that Horus, who's the good guy, is associated with Hercules, and Ophiuchus, and Set is associated with Ophiuchus, and he's the bad guy. And in this story, it's like maple sapling is associated with Hercules. I already showed how Hercules could be a tree, and he's bending down to grab the flint, and Taurascoron, Flint, is grabbing the reeds to fight against. And it's like, it's almost a parallel exactly almost to the Set and Horus battling each other.
Yeah.
In Set and Horus gets his eye ripped out by Set. Can you see how Ophiuchus could have ripped out the eye of Hercules? Again, it's that at the end of the serpent head, it looks like an eye.
Like the serpent head, yeah.
He grabbed the eye out of Hercules'
He pulled
head.
it,
So it's pretty clear in the ancient Egyptian myths that the Set and Horus are Ophiuchus and Hercules. And I think when the brothers are contending in your myths, it's also Ophiuchus and Hercules. So that's pretty much where I think winded up here, Kyle. Oh yeah, the Northern Crown. Also, he says he uses flint and he uses a deer horn. Now, I don't know what the deer horn is. It might be that crown, Northern Crown. It doesn't really look too much like a deer horn. I will say that Ophiuchus, the little part that he's reaching towards, there's 3 stars. So that could look like 3 little prongs. So it could be like a deer horn or a flint. I didn't draw them in, but if we were to zoom in on Ophiuchus, it's got like 3 little prongs too. So that could be a deer horn there. Could be a deer horn.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that.
So I think that's what's going on there. Oh, and also I didn't talk about the rib, but right here is a constellation called Coma Berenices.
Yeah,
Coma
usually
Berenices.
a fire. Remember we talking about the fire in a lot of the myths,
Yeah, it plays different roles, but it looks almost like a pom-pom. It looks like a stick with you know, it's got a kind of a beautiful cloud of stars next to it. So its name, the constellation's name in Latin means Berenice's hair, or Berenice's hair. Coma means hair, just like the coma of a comet. But when I did my book in 2016 on the star myths of the Bible, I argued that that's the rib that gets taken from Eve. Eve is definitely Virgo. And it gets taken, it doesn't get taken out of Eve, it gets taken out of Adam. I argue that Adam is Boötes, and it gets turned into a woman. Well, in this case, you can see the rib going in between the two of them. It's like one's giving a rib, you know, there should be an arrow going from Virgo up to the rib and then going to Boötes, and then another arrow going from Boötes to the rib down to Virgo, and they exchange the rib. So I think that that could be based on the stars, not a Christianizing influence. It's not like the missionaries came along and said, oh, they exchanged ribs because they're basing it on the Bible, because that's not what happens in the Bible. It's like, I think it's part of the stars, and that's what's going on.
Yeah, that's what I guess the first time I read through the stories was before I read your book. I was kind of like iffy on some of the details, but then once I read your book, and then I'm like, okay, everybody has this story, you know. It's not just the Bible.
It's not just the Bible. No.
Yeah, everybody talks about this, and
same thing with the manna falling from heaven. Like I tried to show that in the Greek myths, there's a figure that's like Moses, and he has a little cake that tastes like manna, you know. So I'm gonna cut it off. I'm gonna cut it off pretty soon because the recording will be too long, and also I got to give the house back to my family. I don't have a trailer. I don't have a camper.
But I was listening to Snake Brothers recently, and they were talking about that, like about the man that's basically like space ramen. So
space ramen.
That's how they refer to it. So
that's funny.
And but interestingly, when you're talking about the spirit, and that's when I was just listening today. They were talking about it in one of the earlier podcast, but I forget the guy's name. Scranton, I think his name was. I'll have to re-listen to it.
Laird Scranton.
Yeah, with procession, like half of the procession is the underworld, the material world, and the other half is the spiritual world.
I like
and
Laird
then
Scranton.
With the thing, so I have to look more into that. But it's a very, very interesting concept, and all that. So
well, I know it's after midnight. This is going to be a 2-hour movie, but I will send you the I won't send you the file because it'd be too big. But what I'll do is I'll put it up on YouTube, but with a private link, and you can share it with your wisdom keepers and with whomever you want. I mean, if you want, I'll make it public, but for now, let's make it private. But I do want to share it.
No, what I'll do is once you put it up, I'll send it to Trina. Like I said, she's the one who's giving me all the stuff, and she's a real knowledgeable person, and she knows what's shareable, what's not, and then I'll get her permission to say, can we make this public or not? And if she says, yeah, it's okay.
If she says no, I'm fine. It's your sacred traditions. So I want you to share it how you want to, and how Trina and the others say to do it. But it doesn't hurt my feelings if you keep it private, of course. I'm thankful that you shared the stories with me, because these are whole new areas that I never knew about.
And I don't really see a problem, because the stories I gave to you, I got it off a book from Amazon.
Okay.
So
there you go.
I think we'll be okay. All I did is the ones I sent to you in the book, they're all, even though it's in the late 1890s when they're recording them, they're all in like King James version. So I had to take out all the these and thous and verilies and moreovers, and just to make it into readable modern English. So that's why I retyped everything, just so I could get that and get to know the story better by doing that. So I really don't see why there should be a problem, but I'm just going to double check just to be safe. So I'll drop you a line once I talk to Trina, and she'll let me know. So I'm sure I'll be okay. All right,
awesome,
David.
Man. Hey, thank you, brother.
Appreciate that. Yeah. I'm probably going to be in touch again because I'm
Yeah.
going to need more help in some other stuff.
Well,
So
great to talk
thanks
with
for
you,
all the help.
Kyle. Yeah, I'm
You too, Dave.
happy to do it. See ya.
Yeah, thanks.
See you soon.
Hope to see you in Egypt.
All right, man. Yeah.
Take care, brother.
Take care.